The cook was already there. He said, Daisy, he said, would you like to have a car? She said, I sure would, Mr. Elvis.
She used to set out towels and unfold the pool chairs just how he liked them. Quiet little rituals that became part of her daily rhythm. Before her passing, the long silent housekeeper of Graceland, the woman who lived within Elvis Presley's inner world for 10 full years, finally decided to speak. Her name was Nancy Rooks, and her final words are making longtime fans question everything they thought they knew. It wasn't gossip. It wasn't a rumor. This was someone who lived behind the mansion's closed doors, someone who witnessed the end of an era from just a few feet away. What she revealed doesn't align with the official story, and suddenly, history feels a little less settled. Before the gift shops and velvet ropes turned Graceland into a public museum, it was just a lived-in house, messy, electric, and full of life. And at the center of that life was a woman almost no one outside Elvis's circle even recognized. Nancy Rooks didn't wear sequins. She didn't grace any stages. But from 1967 until 1977, and even beyond, she existed quietly in the margins of Presley's whirlwind. She had arrived there by chance, a temp job through an agency meant to fill in for someone who'd called out sick. But Vernon Presley saw something in her calm presence and asked her to stay. What was meant to be a quick gig turned into a decade-long glimpse into the life of America's most iconic performer. In the beginning, her duties were simple: cleaning, tidying. But quickly, Nancy became much more than a housekeeper. She became Elvis's personal cook, whipping up his favorite Southern comfort food at midnight when he got hungry on his own schedule. She learned his rhythms: fried pickles and banana sandwiches one night, cornbread and meatloaf the next. Elvis didn't live by clocks, and neither did she. Her workday typically began in the early evening, just as most people were winding down. That's when he'd shuffle downstairs, sometimes laughing, sometimes silent, robe untied and hair unkempt. He wasn't the king to her. He was just Elvis, the man who loved late-night hymns and homemade peach cobbler. She knew the difference between the public image and the private man. And maybe that's why he let her stay. She wasn't a celebrity, but she saw celebrities come and go. Musicians, girlfriends, old friends from Memphis. They all passed through like waves. But Nancy stayed anchored, quietly observing the pressure Elvis faced to always be everything for everyone. And she saw the fatigue too, those evenings when the laughter faded, and all that was left was silence in the hallways. Occasionally, Elvis would ask her to sit with him and his grandmother, Minnie May, just to sing a few quiet hymns, not for performance, just for peace. Nancy never betrayed his trust. She didn't run to the tabloids, didn't sell secrets. While others spun sensational stories, Nancy stayed out of the spotlight. When fans asked her what he was really like, she'd offer soft, respectful replies. He was kind, she'd say. He had a good heart. That was it. Even years later, when she chose to share more through her books, The Maid, The Man, and The Fans and Inside Graceland, her words were never harsh. They were warm, thoughtful recollections, stories told without scandal. She didn't sensationalize. She simply remembered. And through her lens, readers got rare glimpses of daily life inside Graceland. Midnight meals, quiet prayers, the sound of laughter echoing from a second-floor hallway. Yet even in those books, she held back certain things. Some memories she guarded tightly. Maybe out of loyalty. Maybe because they were too heavy to say aloud. She was never in front of a camera. But she was there, at the foot of the stairs, in the kitchen, just behind the curtain of history. While Elvis was becoming a myth to the outside world, Nancy was making his breakfast, folding his laundry, listening when no one else noticed his quiet. For decades, she kept her silence. And then, in the twilight of her life, she opened that door just a little. And what she said brought a wave of questions crashing into the comfort of nostalgia. It was the summer of 1977, and something inside Graceland had shifted. The music still played, the jokes still flew late at night, but under all that, a new kind of tension lingered. Elvis wasn't himself. He moved slower, spoke softer. The sparkle hadn't vanished, but it flickered. Nancy saw the subtle signs, the hesitation before standing, the moments he'd ask for a full southern spread and then barely touch it. She noticed his solitude. The upstairs bathroom became his haven, private, quiet, a space even his closest staff dared not enter unless called. Elvis had always been on his own clock, playing racquetball at 3 a.m., flipping through television channels when the rest of the world was asleep. Nancy's life adjusted around his. Midnight pancakes weren't strange. Breakfast at sundown was just normal. But in those final weeks, things felt even more unsteady. He paced more, joked less, as if something unspoken weighed heavily on his shoulders. The day before the end, he played racquetball. Not a man on the brink, but someone laughing, active, in motion. That part always gets overlooked. People assume he was bedridden. But according to Nancy, he wasn't. That night, he was moving through the house, chatting with staff, laughing with his bodyguards. It all felt surprisingly normal, until it wasn't. Nancy remembered him stepping into the kitchen in the early hours of August 16th, sweaty, tired, but awake. She asked if he wanted something to eat like she always did. "You want breakfast, Mr. Elvis?" she asked. He gently declined. That exchange, so ordinary, now carries the weight of everything that came after. "No, I don't want anything to eat right now. I just want to sleep. But could I get some water?" That was all he asked. Nothing dramatic, nothing grand. Just a simple, human need. Pauline brought it to him in one of those clear plastic jugs, the kind you'd find filled with orange juice at a corner diner, drip molded into the side. He grabbed it like it was the first drink he'd had in days, gulping it down as though every cell in his body had been waiting for it. It wasn't what he said that stuck. It was how fast he drank. That look in his eyes. That moment, now remembered in haunting clarity, wasn't dramatic because of what happened next. It was dramatic because of how normal it seemed. Just a tired man, cooling off after a round of racquetball, asking for water. But that was the last time Nancy Rooks would speak to him. And in hindsight, it said more than any farewell ever could. Later that morning, everything changed. Ginger Alden walked into the bathroom and found him unresponsive. Silence took over the house. Then, the noise exploded. Sirens. Panic. The kind of chaos you only understand if you've lived it. But for Nancy, the moment that echoed louder than anything else was his quiet request. Water. Just water. A man who was still here, still fighting, still present. That's the part she couldn't forget. For decades, Nancy said almost nothing. While the world fed on headlines and tell-alls and cash-grab interviews from former flings and distant cousins, Nancy stayed behind the curtain. The keeper of real memories. Her loyalty was not just to Elvis, but to the truth of who he really was. Not the version made for magazine covers, but the man behind the gates. She had stories, more than most, but she treated them like glass. Fragile, breakable, sacred. For a long time, she believed that not everything needed to be said. Not yet. She wrote, quietly, carefully. Her books, like Inside Graceland, offered glimpses, not gossip. They gave people memories to hold on to, not myths to gawk at. She never tried to make Elvis a saint or a scandal. She gave him something far rarer: dignity. And yet, even in those pages, there were things left unsaid. Fragments that lived only in her private recollection. Moments that didn't make the manuscript. Observations that gnawed at her as the years slipped by. Then something shifted. Maybe it was the ticking clock, or maybe it was just time. Nancy began to speak more freely, quietly at first. She hinted. She shared with close friends. She spoke not with bitterness, but with a subtle urgency. There was one thing she wanted the world to understand before she left it behind. Elvis didn't give up. He didn't check out. He was making plans. He was still dreaming. And more than anything, he was still trying. Nancy spoke about the pills, not in scandal, but with nuance. She saw the way Elvis was handled, monitored, surrounded by professionals who treated him more like a liability than a patient. He wasn't being healed, he was being maintained, and that's where things began to unravel. He didn't want to die, she said, again and again. He was tired, but he was still here, still trying to climb out. At a small gathering, someone asked her, casually, not expecting anything, if there was something she wished she'd said publicly about Elvis. Nancy paused. Then quietly, almost like she was still deciding whether it was okay, she said, "I don't think he died the way they said he did. Not really." It wasn't some wild theory. It wasn't fiction. It was a whisper of a deeper truth, a version the tabloids never touched. The world had been told that Elvis Presley simply collapsed, that his life ended in a blur of prescriptions and poor health. But that version, Nancy believed, missed everything important. It flattened him, made him small, when in fact, even in his final days, he was looking for something more. He was considering a way out, not of life, but of the life he'd been trapped in. He spoke of disappearing, starting over, not as the king, just as a man, somewhere quiet, somewhere unknown. Nancy said she started noticing the books in his room. Not tabloids, not fluff, but deep reads, spirituality, health, change, self-awareness. She noticed the shift. He wasn't chasing escape anymore. He was searching for understanding. She told a friend, he wasn't trying to vanish. He was trying to become someone else, someone real. Even through pain, even through exhaustion, he was still reaching. That mattered to her. It mattered deeply. "People think he was reckless," she said, "but I think he was just worn out, drained in every way a person can be. And that's different. That means something." Then came the moment Nancy shared something she never had before. Just days before he passed, Elvis turned to her and asked, "Do you think people can start over?" She replied, "Sure, if they want to." And he smiled, half joking, "Maybe I will. Maybe I'll just wake up one day and leave all this behind." Was it fantasy? Maybe. But the kind of fantasy you have when you still believe in second chances. She remembered that smile, the same one she'd seen years earlier, before the world closed in. She wasn't trying to paint over his flaws. He had struggles, no doubt. His health was fragile. He was bloated, groggy. But that didn't erase the fact that he was still climbing, still believing he could get better. Nancy's voice didn't shake when she told that story. It didn't rise in anger. It just softened, as if setting down something she had carried for too long. "They say he overdosed," she said, "but I think he just ran out of strength. He wasn't high. He just wanted to rest. And maybe he thought he'd wake up and keep going." Then, near the end of her own life, she said something even more unexpected. In a rare interview, Nancy mentioned she often worked the night shift at Graceland after the tours ended. She'd be in the trophy room, alone, mopping floors or dusting photos when lights would flicker on and off without reason. She wasn't scared. She'd just look up and say, "Now, Mr. Elvis, you leave those lights alone. I got to see." It wasn't meant to be spooky. It was just her truth. The house never quite felt empty, and she wasn't the only one who said so. She never looked for attention, never asked for the spotlight. Yet, when Nancy Rooks quietly broke her silence, her words rippled through the fabric of Elvis Presley's legacy like a soft chord that lingers long after the final note. It wasn't the drama of a tabloid revelation. It was something far more intimate. A whisper from someone who'd seen him, not through the lenses of the public, but through the long, quiet hours of daily life. Nancy didn't try to sell a mystery. She offered a moment. And in that moment, she may have told us more about the king than any biography ever could. There was something about how she spoke, calm, casual, like recounting a memory of a friend rather than a legend. One night, as she laid near the platform where his prized jumpsuits rested, she felt a tug on her foot. "I know that was you, Mr. Elvis," she said with a laugh. That simple, almost playful moment was more than a ghost story. It was a window into a man who maybe never really left the home he loved. Elvis, in her eyes, was still there. Not haunting, not hidden, just present in the only way he could be now. And the simplicity of her memory hit fans harder than any headline ever could. What happened next wasn't what you'd expect. No media frenzy, no breaking news tickers, just a slow-burning wave through fan circles, message boards, conventions, passed between people who didn't need proof to believe. They recognized her truth for what it was. This wasn't someone chasing fame or attention. This was a woman near the end of her life, choosing to share a truth that had lived quietly in her heart for decades. And that made all the difference. In a world hungry for spectacle, what Nancy gave was rare, an unfiltered glimpse into Elvis's humanity. He didn't give up, one longtime fan wrote online. He was just tired of carrying us all. That idea hit hard, because for so long, Elvis had been painted as a man who fell. But what if he hadn't fallen? What if he'd just been trying to lay down the weight for a moment? And yet, even as that idea spread, there were doubts. Why now? Why wait so long? But those closest to her had a simple answer. Nancy never said anything unless she meant it. She wasn't chasing cameras. She was chasing peace. And maybe that's why her words carried the weight they did. Because in her calm voice was something we hadn't heard before. Understanding. In a world hungry for spectacle, what Nancy gave was rare, an unfiltered glimpse into Elvis's humanity. He didn't give up, one longtime fan wrote online. He was just tired of carrying us all. That idea hit hard, because for so long, Elvis had been painted as a man who fell. But what if he hadn't fallen? What if he'd just been trying to lay down the weight for a moment? And yet, even as that idea spread, there were doubts. Why now? Why wait so long? But those closest to her had a simple answer. Nancy never said anything unless she meant it. She wasn't chasing cameras. She was chasing peace. And maybe that's why her words carried the weight they did. Because in her calm voice was something we hadn't heard before. Understanding. It didn't take long for longtime Presley researchers to start asking different questions. For years, the narrative had been fixed. A superstar unraveling, crushed by his own myth. But Nancy's version offered a counterpoint, not denial, but context. Maybe Elvis wasn't self-destructing. Maybe he was preparing for something new. Something quieter, something real, and maybe the world just didn't let him get that far. Her words sparked curiosity all over again. Fans revisited old footage, paused on long-forgotten interviews, listened more closely to his final recordings. Were there clues hidden in those fading lyrics? Was the king staging one last transformation, one the world never got to see? And if so, what stopped him? Those close to the Presley estate knew how deeply Elvis had once dreamed of reinvention. The glitz, the Vegas lights, the stage, all of it wore on him. But behind closed doors, he spoke of a simpler life, of music stripped down, of stepping out of the spotlight and into something that looked more like truth. That version of Elvis, a man not fading, but fighting, suddenly came into sharper focus. And as we turn the lens from his final days to his financial life, another side of the icon comes into view. Elvis wasn't just a performer. He was a brand before branding became a strategy. His collection of luxury stretched across eras. Cadillacs in powder blue and pink, custom Stutz Blackhawks, and Rolls-Royces that mirrored his flair. His wrist often bore timepieces from Omega and Rolex, glinting under stage lights. Graceland itself was just the beginning. He once owned multiple properties in California, and even looked into private aviation before it was fashionable, famously customizing his own jet, the Lisa Marie. Behind the scenes, he made smart moves, investing in touring companies, merchandising rights, and even early film distribution royalties. Over the years, he held hefty insurance policies to protect both health and assets, and his estate remains one of the most financially successful in music history. If there's one lesson his life teaches, it's this: build wealth where your passion lives, but protect it like your future depends on it. Yet, beyond the legacy and the lifestyle, there's still something unresolved. If Elvis really did want to leave it all behind and start over, what stood in his way? Was it timing, pressure, or maybe it was that no one knew how to accept Elvis Presley if he wasn't the king? Did the crown define him, or did it trap him? Those questions may never have answers. But what we do have is Nancy's voice, gentle, sincere, and brave. In her final act, she didn't rewrite history. She reminded us that history is often written by those who remain silent the longest. And when they finally speak, we're lucky to be listening. Because maybe, just maybe, the biggest tragedy of Elvis's life isn't how it ended, but how close he came to beginning again. What would the world look like if he'd been allowed to choose a different path? If he'd stood on stage one last time, not as a myth, but as a man ready to change? Nancy believed he still had more to give, and in sharing that belief, she may have changed how we remember him, not as a star who burned out, but as a soul who still burned quietly, even after the lights went down. So, was Elvis really planning a comeback, or just craving peace? Drop your thoughts below. Hit that like, subscribe for more legends, and remember, some stars never truly leave the stage.